It's too hot to be outside.
I know, but I've been sitting in the air conditioning for the last like 6 hours in front of my computer, and I definitely need a change of scenery. So it is hot.
Cindy?
If you can give me about 3 minutes.
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to check in. I'll just watch you. Thank you.
Is Paul here?
Hi,
Is
Paul.
Jeff here?
Sorry about that.
Yes, we're here.
Oh, I don't see
We'll be
you.
starting in just a few minutes.
Oh, there you guys are. Okay. It's a bummer to look at myself on the screen. I don't understand how you guys are so well coiffed. I just feel completely like I've gone back to my youth of, sloppy hair.
I call this my COVID hair. It's getting longer by the day.
I should have shaved today. That would have been a good move.
But you have the advantage of having hair.
Is it? It's heading. It's heading away. It's heading away, Richard. I'll be with you soon.
I'll mute myself for now.
Well, that's the thing. We all take this so seriously. We're not even on the channel yet, are we? Is this being recorded yet?
I believe we're
Yeah,
live.
it's being live streamed right now.
Oh, we are. Hello, everyone. But we haven't called the meeting to order.
I resent
No,
that,
no,
Mark, by the
We're just
way.
waiting a little.
So it's
getting-
not really live.
We're getting our technical things in order.
So while you guys are waiting, I just learned a new trick. If you mute your screen, you can push down on the space bar to unmute temporarily and then let.
Thank you, Richard.
Mr. Mayor, we're ready to go.
Okay, very good. I want to thank everybody for joining us. I'll call to order now the City of St. Helena Joint City Council and St. Helena Financing Civic Infrastructure Task Force Special City Council meeting, Wednesday, June 3rd, 2020. And I'm going to read a special paragraph, and then I'm going to pass this over to Priya to take us a little further in the public participation discussion. So I'll begin in accordance with Executive Orders N-25-20, N-29-20, and guidance from the California Department of Public Health on gatherings. Remote public participation is allowed. We will address the order in the following ways. Members of the public may not physically attend meetings. The City Council meeting will be live streamed on Comcast Channel 28 and on the city's website, barring technical difficulties. Those members of the public wishing to participate must do so remotely via Zoom electronic meetings in the following ways: by either logging onto the Zoom link located on the meeting agenda. Please download the app to your computer or mobile device and enter the meeting ID, or by calling a listed number and enter the meeting ID. Public comment for City Council meetings will be accepted via email to publiccomment@cityofsthelena.org. Please see the end of the agenda for detailed public participation instructions. And Ms. Nixon, will you take us a little bit further in this?
Yes. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council, and members of the task force. It's a pleasure to be here. Mayor Ellsworth, thank you for giving us the overview of how to participate. We have received written public comment to the email address, and those have been posted on the agenda, which can be found on the city's website. We also have people who are participating who have either joined via the Zoom meeting. You can also just call in using the telephone number that is listed on the agenda. And then, as I mentioned, we do have folks who have joined via the Zoom app. And this meeting is being broadcast, and it's also being broadcasted on the city's website. So during public comment, the members of the public who are in attendance will have the opportunity to use the raise hand feature. If you're using an iPad, I believe it's at the top of the screen. If you're using the web app on a computer, it is next to your name or at the bottom. And so that is how we will recognize those who want to participate in public comment. We will keep public comment to 4 minutes, and I will be monitoring that. And I, as well as my colleague Amalia Kozicki, are also here to be your technical leads for this meeting. Thank you very much, and welcome everyone.
Thank you. And now we will do the flag salute. Everybody can keep their microphone muted, and I will just lead the salute if you would join, and you may remain seated. And I'll put my hand on my heart, and if you would follow me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, with indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So now then we'll move to the roll call.
Mayor Ellsworth,
Here.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Here.
Councilmember Chateau,
Here.
Knudsen,
I'm here.
Koberstein.
Here.
Financing Task Force Chair McBroom.
Here.
Vice Chair David.
I think he's muted.
Here.
Task Force members Hale,
Here.
Honig,
Here.
Haley, Wallach,
Here.
Ward. All present.
Very good. Okay, so now we'll move to public comment. Now, in this is a special meeting. So in a special meeting under California law, public comments are limited to subjects on the agenda only. Therefore, public comment will take place during consideration of the item. And each person's comment shall be limited to 4 minutes. So what we'll do is we'll get into the item, and then at the appropriate time, we'll open it for public comment. So now we'll move down to new business. This is the one item on the agenda tonight. This is item 4.1, review and discussion of St. Helena Financing Civic Infrastructure Task Force final report. And this is prepared by Mr. Presswich, our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and welcome everyone. This is an exciting time as we transition formally the Infrastructure Task Force's final report to the City Council. And I want to thank everyone for the time and your contributions to assisting the city as it advances a conversation about updating its civic assets. Your time and contributions are very much appreciated. Our staff enjoyed working with you, and I want to acknowledge April Mitz, who I believe is watching as well, our finance director, as well as our assistant to the city manager, Priya Nixon. Thank you both for your help in assisting with this task force. What the task force didn't know when they started this work was that we would be interrupted by a global pandemic that might stop by every 100 years. And you timed it really well. We only lost 2 meetings, so we had to extend for a short period of time, but it gave you time to work on the work that you were focused on. And I'm grateful that we were able to finish on the time at the time that we did. So tonight, we're really, just as a recap of where we've been and where we're headed, this work that the task force worked on really followed and builds upon the work of the SHAPE Committee, which culminated in mid-2018. And after that report, the City Council went through an RFP process and then selected an architectural firm, Nolan Tam, to advance conversations about various assets and whether to develop cost estimates for those assets and have some community input about how those might look, where they might be, the scale, the cost. And so following that, the council had an interest in community stakeholders and experts weighing in on and analyzing the work of Nolan Tam and challenged to analyze the various fiscal approaches to how to deliver these projects. So tonight we're going to create an opportunity to say thank you to the task force members. And I should mention also the subject matter experts that assisted them, but also to create an opportunity for the council and our community to comment and ask questions of our financing task force members. So with that, let me turn it over to the chair, Tom McBroom, to present you with an overview of this final report. Tom.
Thanks, Mark. I'd like to start by thanking Mayor Ellsworth and the council providing us an opportunity to present and discuss the report. As Mark said, the task force was formed February of 2002 to help the council refine the options that were before them at the time by trying to explore different financing mechanisms to pay for infrastructure projects that were before the city, specifically the City Hall in its options, the streetscape project, and storm drains. And as Mark said too, our work was preceded and built upon the work by the SHAPE Committee, who did a great job of assessing various city properties and options for their use and work to get them back in operation or discuss whatever efficiency they might have. It's interesting that both the work by EMG Corporation and the SHAPE Committee identified the City Hall as in deplorable condition and really in need of replacement. Another significant event that Mark alluded to too occurred in August of 2019 when the public came up with all sorts of great ideas about development options for the Adams Street site, specifically work in the library, City Hall, meeting facilities, park space, venues for entertainment. So by the time we got to the project, Nolan Tam had had narrowed it down with the city's help, or I should say Nolan Tam presented to the city council, narrowed it down to choices to two options. One was a single-story standalone City Hall, and that could be, Nolan Tam showed that on the Library Lane site, but that really could have been anywhere in the city. And fixing up the library and building a new police station and the infrastructure work. The other option was to do a big combined library, City Hall, building a new police station. And to give you some idea, the total costs of those projects when we first got them was the simpler standalone City Hall project totaled $24 million with all the other infrastructure work, and the new library City Hall combination was $50 million. So quite a bit difference in scale. So we started out by looking at the cost of construction because it appeared to those of us in the construction business that they were quite high. $905 a foot turned out to be the estimated cost for both the new City Hall, and our construction committee poked and prodded on that and found out that it is probably high. There is a 20% design contingency in there. So $905 a foot without the design contingency is around $750. Still sounds high, but got to remember it includes furniture, fixtures, computers, phones, everything. That's turnkey operation. Nolan Tam provided what we thought adequate backup based on current projects and recent projects to justify the number. Long story short, we could not justify using a lower number. We also considered briefly looking at private-public partnerships, and that is the 3P for possible construction of the corporate buildings, or the civic buildings rather. And that is a topic yet to be discussed with individual developers as they come into town to do hotel work or other work. Certainly something we should consider. The two infrastructure projects that are not related to the City Hall are the streetscape and the storm drains, and they are the same in either case, whether we build the smaller City Hall or the larger combined library City Hall. They both need to be done in the same size and scope, so I'll just briefly touch on them. The streetscape is a $15 million project broken into 3 phases. What we found probing around is that the city's financial commitment to the streetscape project is pretty modest. There was $163,000 in this year's, I think it was in the capital plan for it. Mark, it might have been the expense plan. I don't remember exactly. Then there was also some design fees that the city had spent. But going forward, virtually all the rest of this $15 million project is paid for by grants or other taxing mechanisms like Measure T, gas tax, things like that. So the streetscape, although large impact for town and addresses certain needs. I think there are safety needs, there are appearance needs, there are other needs that might require it. The financial commitment for the streetscape project is pretty modest. The storm sewers, we're not sure exactly what kind of shape they're in other than by observations. We know that we have flooding. We know we have some collapsed streets. We know that there are large sections of the system that are deteriorated to the point that they are collapsing and need to be replaced. We won't have a final number on the storm sewer estimate until the assessment is done. But for a placeholder, we put this in at $5 million. That is $500,000 a year for 10 years, which is about what the city public works department thought they could manage. We'll have a better handle on that later. Suffice it to say, though, that it is a general fund expense. It is not, there are no available other sources of funding for that, so it will have to be baked into whatever cost estimating we do. So that sort of summed up the cost side, and then we started looking at the revenue side, and I'm going to have Patrick Canale step in and cover the summary for me. But I mean, we started by looking at the city's financial condition to absorb debt. We looked at various sources of income, increased taxes, other revenue sources to pay for the various construction options. So, Pat, would you take us through kind of a summary of the revenue side of the report?
We took a look at the various ways that the city brings in revenue. You guys on the city council know that as well as we do. The mix of sales tax and property tax and hotel tax is roughly equally distributed, and the town has only got a small population and is considering two, pretty expensive projects. So the most appealing revenue source to us were hotel construction, because they have the triple benefit of producing indirect taxes for purchases made in town and property taxes for the developed worth of the hotels once they're constructed, and the occupancy tax themselves, which are significant. That I would tell you is the top level view that we took. Tom, and I don't know when you want to take questions, but we can talk this through in sort of 6 or 7 different levels of detail.
I think that it's important to note at this point that the tremendous leverage we get from hotel development sort of overshadows all other avenues of revenue. And we have people that are interested in building here. We really have limited amount of space. I mean, we can't exactly try to attract other industries. Tesla's not going to put a plant here, and we're not going to do aircraft assembly. So it seems to me the city ought to find ways to accommodate hotel development where it is appropriate to the degree to which it is desired. Well, I think Pat's right. We'll take questions after we're done with that. We provided plenty of data in the report to look at the kind of revenue generating capacity hotels do have. There's a lot of detailed revenue data in there for those who care to dig into it. There's also the possibility of selling excess space. We have, to our best ability, established the market value of some of the excess property. I think that, should we move on to recommendations, Pat, do you think?
If people have questions, as I say, there's a lot of revenue data here. I'm happy to talk about that now or after the recommendations.
So Mayor Ellsworth, would you care to entertain questions now, or would you rather have us finish the summary?
my thought is the summary goes forward, and then we'll come back with some questions. I'm just sort of deferring to you at this point, but I think that would be a good way to go forward.
Okay, then we're not farther to go. We'll continue through. So in terms of the recommendations, we think that we should start steps right now to design and build a city hall, a new one somewhere other than its current site. Recognizing that the current site is valuable as a resort development site, which potentially could lead to about, I think it's $4 million in a sale price plus a revenue stream after that, starting at some year after development, of course. We think that similarly, we ought to find something to do at the police station, either develop plans to build one, or we think probably more appropriately find some rented space for them. In looking at and discussing building of the new city hall, we also ought to have our ears and eyes open for 3P opportunities for a developer to help fund and build those facilities. We ought to take steps now to develop the current city hall and police station site as a resort property, which I assume, and I have to defer to George David on this, but it seems to me that we ought to be thinking about an RFP for that site. And while we're at it, although we don't recommend developing at this point, we don't see the financial need to develop the Adams Street site. However, we do talk about its revenue potential, and the council may well decide to exercise that plan for other reasons. It may be appropriate to also issue an RFP for the Adams Street site to validate our assumptions. I think that, as Patrick has said, the doing one hotel on the current City Hall site is not going to be sufficient to get us there financially. We need at least one other hotel site. So we ought to be actively, if not soliciting, at least working with developers to find plans that work for hotels in the city. We ought to, no matter what happens on the hotel development, those revenue streams are years down the road. And we're going to need funding in the meantime when we consider selling one or more of the underused properties to help us fund that interim time. And I'm going to get into area here where probably maybe some of the other task force members may want to chime in or add their feelings about it. These are fairly passionate issues. One is the need for a comprehensive development plan for St. Helena. One that includes things like how many resorts do we want? How big should they be? Where should they be? How much housing do we need to find decent and affordable places to live for the people that are going to live in these resorts? As we all know, resort development is labor intense. There are a lot of moderate income jobs that are associated with them. The hotels we are talking about are in the, say, 70 to over 100 room range. That means if we follow this path, we're going to need places to house these people. And the city needs really a plan. We found that sorely lacking here, that do we want hotels that are walk-to hotels so the people that are staying in high-end hotels can walk in and visit our downtown businesses, our restaurants, our retail stores? We've said we don't want to become a Yountville or a Calistoga. So the question is, what do we want to become? I mean, what should that plan look like? There really needs to be one. And then workforce housing, you know, the question is, should the city be doing something more to spur along the availability of workforce housing. We identified sites that the city may make available, or parts of these sites may be available for workforce housing. Specifically, we looked at the Railroad Avenue site, and we looked at the current corporate yard site as possibilities to build them. Now, how they would be funded, how much developers would participate in that. Could we find a partner like Burbank Housing to help us participate in some sort of affordable holding housing plan? I think the task force felt that there's a big void in the city planning in terms of addressing that. And the last thing I'll mention is that we sort of wandered off the reservation a little bit in looking at the enterprise funds. And recall that we were asked to look at specifically City Hall, the streetscape, and storm sewers, but the engineers among us, Mr. Wallach and I being two, look at the other side of that Chinese wall, and we see very capital intense businesses. They have dams, huge filtration facilities, pumps, miles and miles of underground pipe. The funding right now is pretty close to break even. I think that the CIP calls for over $30 million in new spending over the next 5 years in the enterprise area, which will require about a little over 18 million in new borrowing. So the current water and sewer rates support that borrowing, but barely. The costs that are associated with the future projects are in current dollars, don't really allow for any inflationary increases in those projects. Plus, if anything breaks, if anything big breaks, or there's a new environmental requirement from, let's say, a federal or state agency, there are no reserves other than the general reserves the city has, but there's certainly no reserves earmarked on the enterprise side to fund that. So that was just kind of our off the reservation comment. And that's really all I have, Mayor Ellsworth, except I would like, before I yield the podium, I would like to also thank the city staff, particularly Ms. Nixon and Ms. Nix, or Ms. Mitz rather, for their help. They were tremendous help to us. Nobody likes a group of citizens messing around in their backyard. We certainly didn't find that to be true. They were more than cooperative. And also I would add City Manager Presswich to that list. He certainly was generous with his time and his commitment.
Pick it up.
Well, sorry. I'm being somehow interrupted there. Sorry, it's my daughter. Adult children never leave. So that's it, Mayor Ellsworth. Sorry about that little interlude.
Thank you for the presentation. Thank you, everybody, for all the work. What I think I'll do is first see if we have some council comment or question, and then go to public comment. I'll initially ask the council if there are some questions. Or I'm seeing Mr. Knudsen.
I just want to throw out that I'm super happy with the work that you guys did and the folks that really dedicated themselves to this report. I thought it was very interesting. I do have some further questions about sort of aspects of it that you may not have uncovered, or at least weren't in the printed report. But in general, I just want to say thank you very much. Good job. We've got a lot of expertise in town, and it was gratifying for me to see the level of professionalism and value that you, the citizens and residents of St. Helena, created. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Additional council comment?
Say something.
Okay. Oh, I'm seeing Ms. Chateau.
Thank you, Mayor Ellsworth. Did all of that. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to know if you guys had some thoughts, if you looked into it deeper about where we would rent for the police station, or if that was just more of a general recommendation.
I think that the question's open. I know that there's opportunities, perhaps at the college. Mark, you may want to address that more than me.
The council has left the door open to a conversation, but we haven't had a conversation.
Okay, thank you. I just asked because of having our city hall site right now tied with the police station. It makes that choice complicated because to take down city hall, the police station is connected to that. And I did have another question about the revenue and funding. Did your task force talk about how long these hotel development projects take and what we do in the interim for getting the money? Since, you know, I'm looking at this and I'm seeing, okay, number one, we need money as a city and we need city hall. Those are the two priorities. I'm very clear on that. Having been on SHAPE, we need a new city hall. Now we have COVID and we have more challenging of a financial environment than ever before, more chaos, more just trying to get a handle on our budget and what's to come with a very serious shortfall. So how did that factor in to your conversation?
So I'm going to refer to Mr. Canelian and Mr. David for further comment. But yes, we did. We fully understand that these projects take years to design and develop and get approval for. And Pat, would you take it from there?
Yeah, I think that that the readiest cash available to the city right now to get one of these projects going would be the quick sale of the current city hall property itself, and potentially one or two of the other underutilized property. Mark shared with us a couple of ways that he might shuffle functions around on the lots that the city owns today, and the varying underutilized properties that the city owns have, you know, varying degrees of marketability and varying values. And so as a short-term source of cash, we recommend that you'll see in the report that we recommend that be part of the solution, and that the city council and other city bodies do all they can to speed some of this hotel development. You know, historically, the relationships between the developers and the city have not been adversarial, but they, on the other hand, have been super slow. And you know, the call for urgency is an important one here. And whether it's the Carnegie Library site, or whether it's the City Hall site, or whether it's some of the underutilized stuff south of the city, those are available to do some more useful things than they're probably doing right now.
George, do you have anything to add?
I do. Tom, I think what you were trying to say in summary is we need to be proactive, not reactive. We're in a unique situation right now. To my knowledge, nobody's ever looked at 5 options for a major hotel in St. Helena. Therein lies opportunity. But as was discussed earlier, we don't really know what we want. We want money. We want, obviously, to enhance the budgets, but we haven't established the criteria that should lead us to making decisions. I think that's an essential ingredient in moving forward. I'd also like to say that the numbers that were developed for these various properties are very conservative. There was no attempt to make them completely financially feasible. There was no attempt to, there was mainly what we tried to do was to position these properties based on what knowledge we have, look at market comparables, look at the performance of those comparables, and estimate what might be possible at these properties. In some cases, we knew much more. In others, we knew very little. So we used the best information that we had. I could argue for or against every one of these numbers. But at the end of the day, you have to take a position, and we have. And I believe the very first paragraph of this report says something about rough numbers. This is not finite. This is not a contest. We're not trying to judge any of these properties. We're just saying this is what we think they could yield. And now let's figure out what we really want and what we need. And then let's evaluate them in light of that criteria.
And I would add to that a single small alternative, if you take the smallest of the hotels and only build one hotel, that probably does not get City Hall sort of paid for in a balanced way over time. But any two projects here get City Hall and a police station and other things paid for the long term, and make a supplementary contribution to the ongoing budget of the city. So there's hundreds of hotel rooms in this analysis, but if you build any two of them, you've solved your financial issue. And George brings up a good point. Do you want 3 downtown hotels, all of modest scale? Do you want things outside of town at huge scale? Do you want things inside of town at huge scale? So you guys know the political, realm of possibility for these probably better than we do. But it is a unique opportunity to have to choose, to be able to choose among 4 or 5 competing alternatives. And there is the possibility that, that once we get a couple built, we might not want that many more hotels or need that many more hotels in town. So there is potentially a first come, first serve auction kind of mentality where you can say to the developers, we're ready to move now, but you need to be ready to move now. And if you come to us as the 5th hotel, you're going to have a much harder time than if you come to us as the 1st hotel. And so, we had a quite limited remit for the committee to choose among 2 specific alternatives. We've explained a clear preference for those 2. But what we learned through that process was that it will probably take more than 1 hotel to get the city's financial footing back to where it might be.
I also kind of want to add to that is that if we know anything based on the fact that we're in a pandemic, things are not always predictable, and real estate deals are not always predictable, whether they're development or sales. So we need to plan ahead in a wider net way, in the sense of getting RFPs for more than what we probably would approve, so that we have the benefit of being able to choose the best scenario for the city overall. So that includes all of the properties, in my opinion. It would be short-sighted and silly for the city not to consider every single opportunity that is available. And that means, either getting RFPs or, if private owners have land that they want to develop a hotel on, they need to send us the projections. And I think, there have been a couple, but even if something gets approved, doesn't mean it gets built. And so I think that is really, really important to say, we need to be able to know what our options are all the way through every option, and not limit it to just who feels like they want to do it right now. So my advice is 100% explore every single option and then make decisions about what you're going to develop.
Thank you. Are there any other comments here at this? Am I seeing Elaine, Ms. Honig? Are you? No. Thank you.
I do agree.
Any other comments here? Ms. Goberstein. I'll come back to you, Elaine. Ms. Goberstein?
Yeah, I have a question. I don't know if this is properly for the vice chair or the chair, but 2 of these sites obviously are owned by the city. And you're talking about being proactive, and that's where we have the most ability to be proactive. Could you speak to whether, now in the near future, next couple months, is the appropriate time for the city to be trying to market our properties. And it strikes me from your analysis that the two are different in some respects as far as who they might attract as a potential developer. And does it make sense to do them together as they were done the last time, or different tactics for different properties that we own?
Thanks. It's a great question. I'm going to defer that one to Mr. David. I think that the question is, what is the market for resort properties? Is it something that's subject to this kind of economic fluctuation? What should be the marketing strategy? George, you want to?
Sure. Sure. Well, first of all, obviously, what might be built on Adams as compared to what might be built at City Hall is day and night. And the results are also of a similar dimension. City Hall site fundamentally gets us seed capital to begin to plan so that we can pursue and not lose any more time than we already will, considering the completion dates on any properties that we think might help fund the construction of these facilities. So the sale of the City Hall site is an interim step to create something that can be very good for St. Helena, but it's a Band-Aid. I'd like to take 2 or 3 minutes of your time and talk a little bit. Yeah, we tend to emphasize money, and there's good reason for that. But as I say, money isn't everything. And so, if we're going to consider the possible sale of city-owned properties such as Adams for hotel development, we have to look beyond the strong economics and also focus on what additional benefits the city could expect if it selects the right purchaser developer. Adams is an incredibly special property, one of the best that can be found. It will attract uniquely qualified sponsors who are holistic and believe they need to be an integral part of the entire St. Helena community and understand that their success is inextricably linked to the success and well-being of our community. Such sponsors think in terms of how they can make their host community a better place to live, help our businesses succeed, deliver workforce housing, participate in and fund community projects, and further enhance our image in competitive scenario. They expect to use their world-class property to accommodate local, national, and international people and events as only the top 2 or 3% of the hospitality industry can achieve. They would improve the ability of St. Helena to compete by sharing their executives' successes and expertise. They will work with city leaders to set high but achievable goals and embellish our image through targeting and marketing to a worldwide audience that is seeking the best and is willing to pay for it. These sponsors are not typically hotel companies. They are entrepreneurs, often families, high net worth families who have integrity, long-term vision, success in creating some of the finest hotels and resorts in the world in prime locations like St. Helena. They invest their own funds for the long term. They are not dependent on financial cycles and are always in the market to buy. They are generous and philanthropic and have long-term histories of doing good in their current communities. They are not trying to get rich. They're already rich, so it's not just about the money, and they always seek greater purpose. To attract such a sponsor, we need to be open-minded, deliver a laser vision of what we expect, and make it clear that we will not sell unless they meet or exceed the needs of our community and are accepted by our citizens. Pursuing such a sponsor is not a commitment to sell, it's an exploration to determine interest and qualification. There is no reason not to undertake this exploration and learn what possibilities may exist. We should be excited about that journey and the potential benefits and how St. Helena can advantage its crown jewel. Now, I know I'm wandering a bit, but the impact of a resort on Adams properly done goes way, way beyond economics. It affects the entirety of the city in a way that that could change its future. So as we think this through, and as we think through that criteria that I came to earlier, we really do need to figure out what we want and what we need, and we need to do it before we do anything. And it doesn't have to take a long time. It's a matter of understanding our community and involving some smart people, getting to it, and defining what we really believe St. Helena needs and wants.
Thank you. Is there any other comment at this point? Am I seeing? Not seeing. I'm sorry, Ms. Honig, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just that I agree that it is helpful to have an RFP on that, because I always think it's useful to know what is it we're looking at, and right now it just seems very abstract. So I would encourage, I figure we have nothing to lose, would encourage an RFP.
Thank you. Mr. Hale?
Yeah, I would second all that and sort of encourage the sort of methodology of understanding that you've got to bring all these things kind of forward together. And also, you know, when you talk about RFPs, it's critically important that you craft them in a way. First, you have to really define what you're after, what you're seeking, you know, so that if they're going to be most effective if you have if you've defined a clear vision of what the city wants to be. You know, I think that's a doable project, but it needs to be, you need to have a strategy to come up with what those RFPs would look like. You know, talk about the scale, the feel, what, you know, what's acceptable and what are we seeking, so that, you know, you don't come back with answers that are based on kind of the wrong set of questions. And I also think that if, you know, the same sort of RFP approach needs to, and kind of holistic approach needs to apply to sort of the workforce housing piece of this that needs to be addressed at the same time. And whether you take, you know, while we're farming these ideas, I think it's important to bring forward, you know, a similar sort of RFP approach to some of the sites that we've identified that could work hand in hand with some of these other things, because I think we've got to build success into the system where we can't lurch forward on one side and we already had, you know, a dire need for sort of workforce housing and just capacity that our existing businesses have struggled with. It would be irresponsible to sort of bring these other things on board without proactively and strategically addressing the workforce housing piece of it. And we have, you know, thankfully we have, you know, a terrific diverse inventory of pieces if they're handled most advantageously, and you take each one and really sort of define its best use and how it can fit and benefit the overall ecosystem. I think we could, you know, we should be looking at this, you know, COVID pause as an opportunity to sort of, okay, if we know it's going to take this much longer, or, you know, this amount of time for any of these things to happen, you know, why don't we, you know, get our ducks in a row, get our capacity set up so that we could be successful when things do liven up again. And I think we, you know, it comes down to having you know, a master plan for town, what it wants to be, and how's it going to get there. So.
Thank you. So if there's, oh, Ms. Koberstein?
You know, I just have one more question to follow up on this housing issue. I mean, through the zoning ordinance revision, you know, we're well aware of the workforce housing issue, and we're trying to take steps to strengthen our ordinance and deal with it. A question that's often asked is, shouldn't the hotel developer build the housing on the hotel site? And I'm wondering, because our normal inclusionary ordinance, that's the first requirement of a residential project developer, but they can ask for an alternative action. And my question is whether it is reasonable to expect that housing to be built on site, or perhaps more reasonable to anticipate some partnership with the city or another developer, have it occur offsite. You know, I'm asking because I'm interested in how we shape our ordinances, and frankly, if we're going to be developing criteria, what makes sense in the world of this kind of development?
Thank you. Mr. Hale?
I mean, I think there's probably several approaches you could take. You know, I think there are, because we have other sites, it may be most or more advantageous to sort of look at that model and develop those capacities at the same time. And I think also, if you realize it's not just hoteliers or future hotels that need that capacity addressed. It's also our Main Street businesses, our eateries, so it's already an issue. So I don't think the city can really expect that, you know, that hotel developers are going to come and serve even potentially their own space needs by just building it on site. You know, so I think if you could craft a better overall approach that, and whether it's, you know, partnerships with local developers that will do workforce housing and for different, I think there's different aspects, there's just different needs in different sectors, different clients. So, you know, I think we have some terrific local partners that understand really the full matrix of all that. And they're fonts of knowledge that we should be harnessing, you know, and I think we're going to have to address the density issue as part of that too, because you cannot, you won't solve that unless you somehow proactively address the density issue.
I also think Mr. David has some comments on this. We have discussed it at length about letting a resort be a resort. If you have a first-rate resort, you let it be a first-rate resort and have them help provide housing elsewhere, which might be more appropriate. George, you want to take that?
Yeah, let me make a few comments. First of all, the city of St. Helena will never, ever have the money to build any notable amount of housing. We don't have a means of acquiring that wealth. So we're going to have to work with partners, or we're going to have to impose things on those who want to do something in our city. But when we do that, all hotels are not equal. And you actually have to look at the employee base and determine what kind of housing is appropriate, what is affordable, what number of people who come with that hotel can afford to live in the city in their own residence. And it's a study. And we should not lose sight of that, because one size fits all does not work.
Thank you.
Uh,
Mr. Doring? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Doring?
Yes, thank you. Interesting conversation. First of all, I would like to thank all of the task force members for the work that you put into this. Mention your names: George David, Daniel Hale, Elaine Honig, Patrick Keneally, Thomas McBroom, Philippa Ward, Richard Wallach. Thank you so much for your work, for your service to our community, especially this kind of a project, which is tainted with a little political controversy. To stand in and do this work is very much appreciated, at least by me. The conversation, and especially the conversation around our needs to do more for our community with respect to workforce housing and the potential downside of development of a property as precious as Adam Street, makes me think about whether and why, well, whether there was the potential discussion of an option 3, a third option, because these options, although they're great and they answer the question we put forth, when you throw in the mix of workforce housing, it causes me to think about other options. And one of the things I was thinking about as a third option, especially with the need of workforce housing, is maybe the potential for a much more modest library, city hall, one or the other or combined, much more modest. Potential not ever building a police department, but still selling Adam Street and using those dollars to do some of the workforce housing that we need, or to work on climate change, or to even replace Adam Street with a property potentially, God forbid, even Hunter property, if it ever comes for sale. If that property, I keep an open mind on that property, but if it never comes to fruition, you have this beautiful property there and you have potential $20 million on Adam Street that, you know, theoretically you could put 10 of that into workforce housing and another substantial amount to purchase open space. So I just, as I'm getting older in life, I'm getting less and less in the thinking of sort of the binary. It's either that or this. And I know you've all thought about this, but it's nice to have a combination of these two options that delivers the money that satisfies the criteria that we will develop. So it's more of a philosophical question, but it's, I think that my thinking is being driven by your deep concern for workforce housing, which I think is a totally legitimate issue, and the community's deep concern for somehow losing that sort of esoteric value of open space.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Doring. Ms. Koberstein, did you have a comment?
Yeah, if we have the opportunity to comment more later, I'd welcome comments from the public at this time.
Very good. Yes, I'll bring it back to the council after public comment. So unless there's anybody else at this point, I'm going to open it to public comment. And Priya, you are Ms. Nixon, you are going to help navigate this.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Ellsworth. I am, and Amalia Kozicki is also going to help monitor. Before we take public comment, we did receive some written public comment that has been attached to the agenda. We did receive someone to ask us to read a public comment into the record. I am going to read that on behalf of the city clerk, and I'm going to start my clock now. This is from Mark Smithers. To our mayor, city council, task force members, and city manager. First, I would like to express my appreciation for the efforts of the task force working once again, reviewing issues related to the much needed rebuilding of City Hall and our police station, as well as ideas on how to finance such facilities. With respect to all, I make the following comments that I hope will be received with open minds. And as much as I'm more in agreement with the task force option number 1 recommendation, which provides for a modest city hall and improvements to the library, not a rebuild, I'm disappointed they didn't research or provide analysis on a multitude of additional municipal financing options beyond selling properties and issuing 30-year bonds not requiring public approval. Please recognize that their financing options will delay the beginning of City Hall construction for at least 5 years, likely many more. This is important. The main thrust of their financing proposal is issuing the 30-year bond serviced by revenues from a hotel built on the existing City Hall site. No bond purchaser will accept these bonds until there is a confirmed revenue stream supporting the debt service. So you first have to sell the City Hall property that could easily take a couple years in this environment to an entity that wants to build a hotel on the site. This is questionable. I'm not in the hotel business, but I would never build a hotel knowingly next to a fire department and a police station. The hotel needs to go through the process of design, review, EIR, and final city approval. And then they need to build the facility and finally start to operate it before the revenue stream can be confirmed. Please note the bonds aren't financing the hotel. As such, a bond investor can't foreclose and sell the property, and this means bond investors won't take the risk of the city's current insufficient revenue stream until it is actually dedicated revenue stream is happening. Also, please consider this. It is decided by City Council, recommended by the SHAPE Committee, and supported by a large majority of St. Helena town persons to build City Hall at its present location. This is well documented in the minutes of the staff report to the June 25th, 2018 City Council meeting, September 17th, 2018 Special City Council meeting, presented in section 4.1, page 23 of the SHAPE report, and supported by feedback received through SHAPE Committee, community outreach, and numerous public comments received. To go against the clear desire to rebuild City Hall at its current site will be a travesty and likely result in long delays. If we want a new City Hall, police station, and improved library, we will need to find reasonable financing options that will result in much needed facility improvements much faster and where previously approved and acceptable to its citizens. Best to all, stay safe, healthy, and wear a mask in public. Mark Smithers.
Thank you.
And with that, I will hand it over to Amalia, who can help with the folks in the public who have raised their hands.
And we do have additional comments, so go ahead and let them speak now. And please, if you could state your first and last name.
Beckett from Angwin.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Although I live in Angwin, of course, I've spoken before, and you know that St. Helena is my city, and those of us that live up on the hill certainly are interested in what goes on down there. So I very much thank you for the opportunity to speak. I almost want to unapologetically walk up to each of you and sort of shake you because you're missing the number one point. Years ago, in the last couple of years, you issued a proclamation from the city and also in accordance with the county, a proclamation that you would be net carbon zero at 2030. So when you get around to doing your development agreements with all these hotels, I hope that we pick the planet over profit. It was in 2018 to remind you that you supported Measure C. Measure C was all about watershed protections. As you know, your primary water supply is Bell Canyon Reservoir. That starts up here in Angwin. Without that, pretty much values of your homes, all your infrastructure, the whole town is worthless. The climate is in a catastrophe. It is a crisis. When you talk about development, you must ensure that anyone that bids or enters with an RFP also can tell you how they can do this without increasing the carbon footprint of St. Helena. It is incredibly important that you recognize the climate, but primarily in your case, because I think you're more apt to run out of water and have a water crisis than anything else in St. Helena. It's my understanding that there's water enough out of Bell Canyon and your two pumps. There's enough water for the residents within the city limits, but you need to buy water from the city of Napa and of course through the state water project, which costs a lot more money, and that ultimately ratchets up the cost for every person that lives within the city limits. So when you start thinking about hotels, you're just going without question, increase the cost of water to your residents. No question about it. So water's an issue. It is really an issue, but if you drive the carbon footprint up, if you sequester less carbon over the next 9 years, it really won't matter whether you build a hotel or not. It'll be too late. Someone needs to show the leadership in this county and in St. Helena to take care of this climate crisis in your little microcosm in St. Helena. Everyone has to do this. This is your primary goal when you talk about development within the city limits of St. Helena. You've supported Measure C. Why did you do that? Why did the city and the city council support Measure C? You did it because you care. You care about your infrastructure, you care about your water supply, you care about the climate. Don't forget about it when you start talking hotel development, please.
Thank you.
One more thing, live up to the proclamation. I think you get the gist of what I'm trying to say. Anything else would be running on, so you can cut me off right now. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
4-minute limit. Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Would you mind repeating your first and last name again for the
Sure.
record?
It's Michael Hackett.
Thank you very much. And I'll go ahead with additional public comment from other members. Okay, Ms. Khan, go ahead.
Yes, thank you for allowing me to speak to you this evening. My name is Eve Khan. I'm a 25-year Napa County resident and recently appointed LAFCO commissioner. My official title is the alternate public member to Greg Rodino, who you probably know well. For those unfamiliar with LAFCO, the Local Agency Formation Commission, we are a state agency tasked with managing local government boundaries, evaluating municipal services for effectiveness and efficiency, and to protect prime ag land. So you're wondering why I'm here. First of all, I want to compliment the task force for their thorough fiscal analysis, and it's been very interesting to see the different perspectives that you each have. Secondly, the task force proposal, and Mike kind of stole some of my thunder, but the 2+ hotels that you have or projecting, plus new restaurants, pools, and spas, and also including your proposal also includes a recommendation for raising water rates as one component of your fiscal plan. Additional hotels and associated workforce housing will all need reliable water sources and will require an equivalent analysis of available water and wastewater consistent with the policies in your general plan land use elements. And that might be something that you want to do as part of your comprehensive development plan that you mentioned. So I want to bring to your attention the release of the very first Napa Countywide Water and Wastewater Municipal Service Review. I'm just going to call it MSR for short. The draft MSR references water service and visually identifies all the locations outside the city's sphere. I can't show you the map right now, but page 202 in the document clearly identifies the locations in bright blue and also notes some overlap with the city of Napa that also provides water in the Rutherford area. These parcels are all under county jurisdiction, and some development applications in the pipeline right now may create an undue burden on St. Helena's water resources and rates over and above the plans you have proposed. One recommendation to pay attention to as you go through the MSR is to eliminate overlapping water service and provide water security and equitable rates through a county-wide water district similar to one that's existed for decades in Marin. I want to let you know it's important to note that the city of St. Helena is participating in an MOU among local municipal water purveyors to develop a county-wide drought contingency plan. And also, all these participating agencies are also evaluating opportunities for supplemental water supply and constraints on their current system. So I encourage you to take advantage of this unique county-wide MSR, as you might find additional city and/or county-wide options to determine the feasibility of your plans. And lastly, the city clerk has kindly included the public notice in your agenda packet. We encourage public review of this countywide MSR. Comments to the draft are due by July 20th. We are planning a public Zoom meeting July 13th. And while the whole document is an overwhelming 566 pages, the executive summary overview are 50 pages, and the section on St. Helena is 38. So I hope you take the time to look through that, to give us your comments, and see if some of the suggestions could help you in the direction that you're moving forward. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for the public comment.
And we do have additional comment as well.
Thank you.
All right. There's still no audio?
Mr. Wilson, go ahead.
St. Helena staff and council members and community volunteers on this task force. It's a pleasure to be here. I do want to thank in particular today Anna Chateau and Mayor Ellsworth for the stabilization efforts of the Climate Action Committee. Mike mentioned a while back the proclamation that you, the city of St. Helena, made a year ago this month. I find it interesting to listen to your thoughts about raising money in this economy of ours, and it's certainly a difficult discussion to have. At the same time, I'd like to hear more about thoughtful means of reducing our greenhouse gases, and they have to be intentional and not circumstantial. And I haven't heard much about that today. Maybe we're still getting to that. And they have to be sustained over many, many. So one of the considerations I would hope you'd make is how, especially given this virus going around, where we all take a step back and consider our next move. Where do we move? And I would say, turn around and run in the other direction, because we never want to move back in the direction of normal, which is the path to. And so we want to do the opposite. We want to accelerate the transition towards the future that we're here prior. Children. I hear talk about the comprehensive development plan. Everyone wants that. I would recommend that you committee members, task force members, take a look at the countywide commitment to address climate change. I want to just say briefly that it states, it quotes the IPCC, limiting global warming to 1 AC would require rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. And it goes on to say that we will not be able to stabilize at or below 1.5 degrees C without undertaking additional pre-2030 climate mitigation and restoration activities, and that these urgent actions are additional and complementary to our current efforts. And so please step back in consideration of this comprehensive development plan we have. And let's make the organizing principle going forward our carbon budget, which is to say the climate emergency. Right across the hill in Santa Rosa, we have the Climate Center. It used to be called the Climate Campaign. That's Ann Hancock's group who put the CCA on the map all over the state. And they're looking for statewide commitments by or before 2020 that will allow policies and fundings to be in place statewide by 2025. And they are telling all of us that we need to achieve net negative emissions by or before 2030. And there's a lot like Mike mentioned a minute ago, and it's also what the Schools for Climate Action and the University of California is saying. We need to have our climate impacts down to negative emissions by or before 2030. That's the healing process. Still, right now we're talking about adding carbon by basically enabling and encouraging.
Mr. Wilson, we're coming to the 4 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Ellsworth.
So thank you very much for your public comment.
And we do have additional public comment as well. Ms. Durbin, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Thank you to all of you for all your hard work and your commitment to our community. I want to read just a couple of sentences from an article in the Star from September of 2018, wherein it says the council members unanimously agreed that the current city hall needs to be torn down and are strongly leaning toward building a new multi-use city hall on the current site. And Jeff Ellsworth, our mayor, was quoted as saying, by keeping City Hall in the same place and then making it active, whether it's with retail or with exhibition space tied into the park, we get a kind of double benefit. I'd also like to read from our current general plan, which states under economic benefits, a healthy parks and recreation system is very important to local economic development. The availability of accessible open space is an issue that is central to quality of life, as access to open space is an important factor that people consider when choosing where to live or establish their business. Recreational amenities, including parks and green spaces, can help increase the value of nearby properties. Therefore, parks bring economic benefits to individual property owners and businesses and strengthen the local tax base, generating more revenue for public services and facilities, including new parks and open space. And it goes on to say, with approximately 27 acres of parkland and a population of 5,900 in 2018, St. Helena's current ratio is 4.7 acres of parkland per 1,000 residents. The nationally recommended standard is 10.5 acres per 1,000 residents. Mary Stevenson from our town did a fabulous workshop last year. And at that time, she stated that finding property is much harder than finding financing for workforce and affordable housing. So I'm really encouraged, Mr. Doring in particular, by your focus on our need for housing. But I would disagree that selling open space to purchase open space for housing would be a practical way to approach it. So I would just like to say, there are several hotel option sites available that don't require giving up public open property. I can't say how opposed I would be to selling public open space to put a hotel on when we don't have other options to replace the public open space, but we do have other options for hotel development. And I want to really applaud those who are speaking about our environmental crisis. It's really real, and I hope that we can all somehow collectively find a way to make that a higher priority than money, because quality of life won't exist if we don't have a livable environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
Mayor Ellsworth, we do have additional comments.
Thank you.
Elaine, go ahead.
Oh, hello. I'm sorry, I didn't
Hello.
realize that I had pushed that I wanted to speak button yet. First of all, I want to thank and commend the task force for taking on what must have looked like a daunting task when they started, and for distilling it into terms that we can all understand. But while the report appears to be a very thorough analysis, there are some omissions and assumptions that I find particularly troubling and that I hope will be taken into consideration before any decisions are made. Assumptions concerning occupancy rates in the various hotel scenarios don't seem to take into account the impact that wildfires, smoke, and other disasters have on tourism and visitation, which is the inherent danger in putting so many eggs in the TOT basket. I would like to see a more balanced approach to the city's revenue stream so that we don't fall short if and when there is another crisis, such as COVID-19. There is no mention in this report of the other big hotel resort projects planned in the area just outside of our city's borders, including the Hall project south of town and the Jackson family project north of town at Freemark Abbey. When those are approved and come online, supply will probably exceed demand, and that will likely have an impact on occupancy rates and the assumed income from TOT, not to mention the quality of life for the people who live and work in St. Helena. And unless I missed it, I don't see anything in this document that takes a hard look at our water sources and what its availability might look like going into the future, particularly in light of the heavy water use we might anticipate from additional hotels and resorts and another drought, and what additional burdens that might impose on the people who live here. Nor does this report take into account the cumulative impact of increased development, water use, and traffic on climate change, which is still very much a global crisis. And then in listening to the comments tonight, it wasn't clear to me that if there's a hotel put on the City Hall site, and the idea is that we have to have two hotels to be financially solvent, and you end up putting one on the Adams Street property, do those other 3 hotels also still have an opportunity to be approved? In which case now we're looking at 5 new hotel resort developments in our little town. And one final thing regarding workforce housing, I see that a couple of the developers offered an opportunity, or were offered an opportunity, to provide additional workforce housing. But if they are not providing more than what they need, we're still operating at a net loss of affordable housing. And that's all I had to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there additional public comment at this point?
There is no additional public comment at this time.
Very, very good. Well, I will bring it back to the council. Are there any initial comments from council?
Oh, I apologize. There is one additional comment. Go ahead with that.
Very good.
Am I connected?
You are, yes, go ahead.
Yes, you are.
Hi, everybody.
I heard the primal scream.
I'm sorry? I'm sorry, I can't.
I think you're good to go.
Okay. Hi, it's Oliver Caldwell. Hi, everybody. And thank you to the task force and the council for putting this together. This scenario goes around and around and around. I feel like I've been on this merry-go-round for about 4 or 5 years, where we always have these consultants brought in and various ad hoc committees brought in, different analysis of what to do. And we're always on the same boat, which is we don't have enough money to take care of the town. We all have the big city services of police and fire and library, things like that. And yet we don't have really the means to take care of everything. And we find ourselves always in this conundrum where we have to look to possibly hotel development to get us out of here, because that's really one of the only industries that we really have. And the problem I have is every time we try to get a rational basis for arguing to develop hotels or to sell Adams or whatever, there just seems to be a flurry of negative responses that show no alternatives of how to get us out of this bind financially. So we could always talk about, climate control and housing. We could talk about, energy and on. But we can try to solve all the problems of the world. But in the end, we're right back to where we were, which is we don't have any money. And, I'm a merchant downtown. I came here 12 years ago and I invested my life savings into restoring this historic building, because I had a vision about long-term of being in St. Helena. And this is where I wanted to raise my kids, and this is where I wanted to grow old. Well, I'm losing that feeling. I feel like I've been abandoned. I feel like I'm on this lonely, dead street. I just got back here from being in Santa Barbara for about 3 weeks, and I'm depressed. It's depressing on this street. And then when I hear these arguments that have nothing to do with saving the downtown, and that's saving the climate and saving everything else, I feel like, well, what happened to the downtown? Are we just going to let this drift off nowhere? Because there's not a big line of merchants wanting to come into this town and take over these spaces. So I think you got to put this in perspective, that not only are we trying to save our city in terms of the infrastructure, trying to build a city hall, but we need to save Main Street. There's just not enough advocates coming forward to advocate for Main Street. And one of the reasons is the merchants are burned out. You know, they've been wanting some action by the city council, but it just goes around and around and around and around. And, you know, some bullies come onto the microphone and the city council backs down and nothing gets done and the can gets kicked again and again and again and again. I mean, this argument with Adams and hotels or whatever, this has been going on for so long. And somewhere along the line, we're going to have to take a position. We just can't keep arguing about this because there's no really other strong alternative. We're not going to borrow money. I don't think you're going to get anybody to sign on to go into debt to build a city hall. I just don't think that's going to happen. I certainly don't want to go into debt. I'd rather have the tourists pay for it. That's my feeling. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Is there additional public comment?
Mr. Mayor, are individuals allowed to provide public comment multiple times?
No, just one time per item.
Okay, I believe we're done then.
Okay, very good. I will bring it back to the council now. Are there any initial comments or questions after public comment? Mr. Knudsen. Then we'll come to you.
Help, I'm muted. Hey, I wanted to also thank everyone who made public comments. I think it's really great to have engagement despite, this is the first public meeting that we actually have real comments coming in. It's very tough for folks. And I know it's also hard for some of the folks that are viewing this on TV to hear people, and it's hard for us to hear them as well. So this is not perfect, but I'm excited where we are as a city. We're going to manage through this COVID-19. I don't think we need to be nervous or scared about what our commitments are as a city to the residents, to the people who live here. This town has had unbelievably nice feeling in these 3 months that we've been shut down. People have been on their bikes with their kids outside. This is an amazing residential community. And we're going to support our downtown. We're going to support having the revenue streams that we need to for our town. And I just want to, give a shout out for St. Helena because this place is actually the bomb. All right, thanks.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Doring, I believe you had a raised hand, and then I'll come to Ms. Koperstein.
Yeah, thank you. There was some discussion in the report about debt capacity, and I know you've made some assumptions. Can you talk, could somebody from the committee talk a little bit more about what our actual debt capacity, borrowing capacity is, according to the consultants that you consulted with? Maybe a little bit more discussion there. I see a number that's been put out there, but I'm not sure if that is the number, that is the debt capacity, or maybe more discussion about that would be helpful for me.
Matt, are you ready to discuss that?
I think, Paul, the simple answer is there's not much debt capacity there. The city has a $15 million annual budget and spends nearly all of it every year, and these are in before COVID times. So we heard about the double impact of some revenue sources and the triple impact of hotel revenue sources, but the city's short-term financial pinch is real, as you guys are seeing by having to dip into the reserves, at the moment. And so what we heard earlier about freeing up some capital from some of the city property now to get some maneuvering room to get a modest number of hotel rooms built seems like the least worst of the alternatives that we face. It's almost impossible to raise property taxes, and it is hard to get more sales tax out of a Main Street and industrial base that's under pressure. So we went to the place where we saw opportunity. The political history around developing hotels on public land in St. Helena was scary to us. So part of why we showed the 5 alternatives that we were aware of is that it might be a mix of speeding up hotel development on private property some of which is already underway, as well as using the property that the city owns to the best advantage. It's a truism in this development business that the bigger projects typically take longer to get approved and to get built and carry more uncertainty. So there really is this idea of walk before you run. If we were presented with a challenge to choose between what I'll call a really big city hall and a more modest city hall, it wasn't our place as committee members to say whether a city hall, whether a police department, or whatever. But the choice we made here was the more modest of the two proposals, with the smaller carbon footprint of the two proposals, with the less uncertainty of the two proposals. But we tried to offer that recommendation in the context that the city's got to do something pretty quickly, because what Oliver said earlier is really true, is that we are 6,000 people, but we want a police department and a fire department and a library and some of these other stuff. So we've either got to moderate some expectations, or we've got to come up with the money. And the ability to borrow right now, Paul, is just really not that high.
Thank you. Ms. Koberstein, and then I'll come to Ms. Chateau.
Muted.
Still muted, Mary. Ms. Koberstein, yeah.
I want to join in with my fellow council members and thank you all for your work. This is very useful information, difficult to develop during the time period that you had to work together. And what I want to avoid is that we put this on the shelf and do nothing yet again. I take very seriously your comments that we should be proactive and that we should be looking at least at what can happen on our sites so that we get somewhere. There is hotel potential elsewhere, but we don't have the real potential to make it happen. So as I look at it, I think these comments about sustainability, climate crisis, they're all very reasonable and make a lot of sense. And when we tried to develop criteria for Adams in the first place, we tried to address sustainability, housing, and other concerns. And I think I think we can't overlook the fact that although a small hotel on City Hall property would generate $4 million immediately upon a sale, Adams would generate 5 times that. I'm not here to advocate specifically for Adams, but to advocate for the city and this council to take the step to look to see what somebody might offer to do for the community, so that we can figure out in a more concrete way what are our real revenue sources. I'm going to ask the city manager, but my part of my take from this is we need to be more specific about what we want. And I think we also need guidance as to how we're willing to go about anything if we are. And my suggestion would be that we maybe have a city manager get together with our city attorney, who needs to be involved in any discussion of offering to sell city property, and bring in perhaps the chair and the vice chair of this task force, and come back to us and tell us what the real processes would be and how we would develop criteria, whether we would market, how we would market our own property. The last point I would make about Adams is the potential to help the downtown, which has been discussed previously and again tonight. at 80 rooms, it provides more benefit to the city financially than the other 4 options combined in the long term. And if you're concerned, now, Pat, I see you shaking your head. If you look at the total of the sales proceeds, the TOT that's coming in, based on your numbers, that's where we get. And
I think it's an important thing to remember that when you sell Adam Street, $20 million comes off the city's balance sheet.
You know,
it is not a free sale. It has 4 times the impact because you're selling 4 times the property. So it's an important, it's $20 million that you're giving up that you will never have again as owned property. You may earn more down the road because of that initial 4 or 5 times larger investment. So you're right, the impact could be very large, but the cost is large and largely not recoverable.
Well, part of the way I look at it is the $8 million a year of spending that is going to come into the city projections due to guests at that hotel. In the course of 5 years, that's $40 million, twice the book value of the property if it just stays on the books and we do nothing with it. Every 5 years, your projections so far are that there would be $20 million coming back from that $20 million property. And so I just feel it's incumbent on us to look at it because it is such a potential financial impact for fewer rooms altogether. But what I'm suggesting is, could we get some feedback from our staff and our city attorney with further help from the task force on just how to go about developing these criteria and what our paths might be if we're interested in marketing our own property.
So I think that's a great idea, but just let me make one further response. The estimated purchases from some of the other hotels, all of which are nearly similar room counts and nearly similar per night room rates, are in the $6 or $7 million a year range. Some of those are from properties that are privately held properties. So I think that the way to think about the comparison is think about somebody whose hotel the city doesn't have to sell any land to enable, producing $6 million a year, versus us selling $20 million worth of our property to enable $8 million a year. Again, I have no dog in the fight as to which one of the hotels is there, but almost all these hotels are in the 60 to 80 room range. They're almost all in the $800 to $1,500 a night range. They're all within a mile or so of town. So the purpose of illustrating is not to be exact on one or the other, but the one number that certainly jumps off the page in the report is Adam Street is our biggest underutilized property. If we keep it for